Nadyn dda, agus fáilte go comedy call agus bunstructure ha gael an diawm agus Microsoft Teams agus is available. Garlic translation is available at today's meeting. Please ensure that you have your headphones on if you require translation services. Den of cíndach go bhfuil na microphone ac agus mistáisiigh sin ar sin háirliche dulcreiten tréirliche le fachgolúri agus a chuinú neis go chlár goiteach gáilta.
Our gracious God, we give thanks for your goodness to us this day and for all the mercies that we receive from your hand. We give thanks for the splendor and beauty of this day. It reminds us of that you are a creator God and that you do all things well. We ask, gracious God, that you would bless us here in the duties that we have as councillors and as members of this committee, that we would exercise our duties with dedication. We pray that you would bless us in all our deliberations. We give thanks for the gifts that you have given to us, and we give thanks for the privilege of being stewards of these great public duties that we have to carry out. We give thanks that we have the opportunity to serve you in this capacity. We pray that you would bless the communities that we represent. We give thanks for them and for all our constituents. We pray for all who are in our care as an authority. We give thanks for all the dedication and hard work that is carried out by our staff throughout these islands. We ask, gracious God, that you would bless then the deliberations of our committee this day and bless the chair. We pray that you would bless Ronald as he joins us here to give a presentation. We remember him and his family, and indeed the chair, in the recent sore bereavement and loss of the close relative in such tragic circumstances. We pray for your blessing upon Boyd and Sheila, that you would embrace them and they would be aware of your loving kindness at this time. Bless us all, we pray. We remember Ian McKinnon, who has stood down from his duties for Macona over many years of dedicated service. We pray that you would bless him and Mary as they look forward to their retirement. We ask now that you would go before us and keep us and bless us, and may we continue to look to you for our strength and to be our stay as we look forward to this day. Go before us now and pardon our sin for Christ's sake. Amen.
An y daim fi stiwdig na cwniw na lenes nhw ar ffeinia. Mae hysef na bail den comedy agus fialach tra computer ffac o'r cama eid agus yr microphone Mae ha offegau na fialach tra computer ffac of an dachwyd mae'r ilsef y blin di asg no a ffegwrs ceist. Chwy yn gyn y bwyl agus offegau yn gyfel system ffew sy'n diawmar a smach y cycharych yn y mags. A mac a chiad dyna a ffew y bwyl sgwanya agus by yn gor wanya yn stad. A nwy a lycus yn garich a stwy mag arich a mag cwderaf. Chafi ach da fag derach ag amsyn by. Mae eisiau ferson tilig o ceist fag o'r microphone eid agus mae ha offegau yn y byn di as chorich yn adaf an nhw rwt y ianw. Het piafachus a horst y fwyl a chometi. A hyf clari yn wy, fe mi bwyl yn diawm ar acol no cliach a chwy yn nghel. Peinig yw gyfel a chwynw go clari agus yn diwy na cwnw gywer lladach lun na Comhairle. He cwsper yn lwg y deich a hyndi agus ag agi ag agal yn y diafod ag dedig na cwnw. Agus mystach a sien het eori lwch comparst a hylig eid an offegyd imychi agus bwyl a chwnw ag. Chiad cwsper ger hwndasan. Ger hwndas na cwnw eid siala ffeichet i'n gyplaen. Da wil ys triad eichet agus a sien son hwndach ag ofl siw gwndach. Dach belief. Dal y cwsper ger hwndas cwnw haidrans eid. Mynyl la ffeichet i'n gyplaen. Da wil ys triad eichet agus a sien son fisrach. Waar ik maar ik boeil aan een guspersen bij, ik waar oprug, chorgaif, zijn klaar. We gaan veel meer een niche boeil aan over, ieder wil het klaar, gusper. Jaren is boeil zijn jammer, zijn en draastellen weer, ik, het microfoon, noor teams, weer klechter en buchten, tokkel live. Den kindig gewil siwe kennemachig a dís tron chusper imachi aus gewil siwe lentel en glechge mar a cha a víneach yn roi. En mi fechgin dynne klaar a gwy. En nil, riva, nes go tasbennig pistrachig vo haitrans. Tasbennig li rol roppestan studig komparstachig haitrans. Bevel een vaartige je rol, maar kom je studige compartige haitrans. Jefschen visserige rol aan dive die op het haitrans as na Eilean in the year. So.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson, and thank you, Councillor Crichton, for the kind thoughts in your blessing. But thank you for the invitation for me to come along and share an update on what Hightrans are doing. And hopefully in doing that, I will get through some slides with some time for some useful discussion afterwards. So I'll keep an eye on my time, is probably what I was saying there. So Hightrans is the regional transport partnership covering most of the Highlands and Islands. Regional transport partnerships have been around for some time in various forms, but as statutory bodies since December 2005. And we were established to strengthen the planning and delivery of regional transport so that it better serves the needs of people and businesses. The first task of each regional transport partnership was to prepare a regional transport strategy that would be supported by a delivery plan. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we move on. RTPs bring together local authorities and other key regional stakeholders to take a strategic approach to transport in each region. We are independent bodies corporate defined in the Transport Scotland Act 2005, but that legislation bases us on the local government model. So we are really like joint boards, bringing councils together to perform local government functions and priorities collectively and strategically over our larger areas. All local authorities in Scotland are members of regional transport partnerships, and clearly the Comhairle is part of Hightrans. The board of Hightrans is made up of a representative appointed by each council, and we also have the opportunity to appoint up to 3 non-council board members who can add additional knowledge and expertise to the work of our board. We currently have a vacancy for one of these roles, so if anybody knows anybody who might be interested in the Western Isles, clearly that would be very, very welcome. The current board members are Councillor Robertson, who is also our chair, Councillor Amber Dunbar from Murray, who's the vice chair, Councillor Andrew Kane from Argyll and Bute, Councillor Ken Gowans from Highland, Councillor David Dawson from Orkney, and we also have 2 non-council members, Naomi Bremner and Robert Andrew. And perhaps just as a, to highlight, I think, the importance that islands have around the board of Hightrans, it's maybe worth noting that in addition to Councillor Robertson, Councillor Kane is a native of Mull. Councillor Dawson obviously is Orcadian, but also Naomi Bremner, our non-council board member, lives on the island of Stronsay in Orkney as well. So we have a really strong island presence on the board, and indeed quite a strong island voice in the Hightrans officer team as well. In taking forward our work that aims to improve and make a difference to the transport network of the Highlands and Islands, it's essential that we work with our key stakeholders, particularly local authorities. And while we enjoy our status as a key agency in community planning, which is recognised through the Community Empowerment Act, we see these as really adding value over and above the day-to-day work that we would be doing as a team with our partner councils. We also work closely with Transport Scotland, transport operators, other key agencies like CMAL, and increasingly we are finding forums like the regional economic partnerships to be a really useful addition to trying to gather together a collective and strong regional voice. And I think that's really important, as is the Convention of the Highlands and Islands. I think if we can get the voice of this region across on our own behalf, it's far better than having things worked out for us from the Central Belt. So moving on to how we capture what we see as the needs of regional transport in a document. We are developing a new regional transport strategy today, and this will define the development of transport in the region over the next 20 years. Well, we hope that's the case. The regional transport strategy will be built around the 4 national transport strategy priorities of reducing inequalities, taking climate action, helping to deliver inclusive economic growth, and improving health and well-being. Our Case for Change report has recently been open for consultation. I think the consultation closed on the 6th of May, and we got a really healthy response rate from right across the region. This document sets out the rationale for transport investment in the region. It sets out the strategy's objectives, which we would seek to deliver. Our plan is to publish a draft regional transport strategy in this autumn and have the whole thing finalised in early 2024. And I would expect us to be taking the draft strategy back to the Comhairle as well, so that people can properly comment on that and feed into that process. The process itself is supported throughout by an impact assessment process consisting of a strategic environmental assessment, an equalities impact assessment, and very importantly, an island communities impact assessment. Moving on to what we've identified through the strategy itself, the main demographic and spatial issues across the region, and I wouldn't apologise, I'm going to touch on other parts of the region as well, but hopefully provide a Eilean year's flavour for that. So the Highlands region has a higher proportion of older age groups and a lower proportion of working age groups, putting pressure on service delivery. That's nowhere more acute than here. Population density is very low. Despite accounting for over half of Scotland's landmass, the region is home to less than 10% of its population, and that's even with the weighting of the more dense population around the Inverness and Murray regions. The population of the region is expected to reduce in the medium term, and its age profile will increase. This will increase the need to access health and social care services, and will also cause labour market issues, as the geography of the region effectively precludes in-commuting. Highland, Murray and Orkney saw significant in-migration in the decade prior to the pandemic, a trend likely to be accelerated by changing working patterns post-pandemic. And over half of the region's population is classed as remote or very remote, which is really surprising in a way, because with Lochmarrie being the centre of the universe, yet, that's the perception that abounds outside of the region. So, I think it's how we look to address that. What are the primary socioeconomic characteristics of the region? Car ownership rates remain higher than the Scottish average, with a high degree of car dependence for many, and the requirement to own and run a car forced upon people, which is having a significant financial impact on many households. Many businesses have strong outward focus, selling goods out with the region, as we see with Barra Atlantic in the slide. The region is also well endowed with natural resources and has a significant primary sector. Reliable transport links to other parts of Scotland and beyond are as important as those within the region itself. The region is unique in rural Scotland in terms of the high volumes of inbound seasonal tourism. The region sees less in the way of extremes of wealth and deprivation than other parts of Scotland. Large parts of rural Highlands have some of the highest rates of second home ownership in the country, and we just need to think of Harris for that. Travel to work areas within the region have a high degree of self-containment, which can be a positive thing, and providing access to healthcare is already a key issue and will become increasingly important as the population ages. Some of the problems in the region, I'm not skirting around those. Journey times between settlements within the region and to and from other parts of Scotland are long and can be characterised by low average speeds. Journey time reliability by road is poor. Reliability is becoming a major issue on almost all ferry networks in the region, with ageing vessels and port infrastructure breaking down more frequently, compounding underlying weather-related reliability issues. And in the slide, I've actually shown Scotland's oldest operational car ferry, and it's not a Calmac one, it's the MV Belnahua, which serves the island of Ling. It's part of the Argyll and Bute Council fleet, and it's just underlined that what we're seeing with the Calmac fleet has also been a consequence, and a more extreme consequence, in the underfunding of local government to provide the same essential services. So the average fleet age in the Argyll and Bute Council ferries fleet and the Orkney ferries fleet is 8 years older than the average Calmac ferry. So it's a real issue, and that is really showing, I think, now. Public transport frequency is generally very low, and in most cases operates over a shorter day than elsewhere in Scotland. This limits access to opportunities and can lead to expensive overnight stays. Long travel distances, and in some cases the need to combine an overland trip with a ferry or air service, make the average journey more expensive. Some roads within the region suffer from a poor safety record, and while several major roads such as 82 and the A96 run through multiple settlements, causing impacts on those places as well, Fort William as an example. Transport resilience is a major issue across the region due to the extremes of weather, geological instability in some places, and limited diversion routes and ageing assets. We see it with the Rest and Be Thankful, but we've also seen the overwashing issues in causeways as well, that are much closer to home here. Some other transport problems in the region. With Inverness acting as a major regional centre to a widely dispersed hinterland, this can generate significant vehicle kilometres and demand for parking in the city. Many settlements are rural, and the region includes some of Scotland's most remote communities. Labour markets are largely self-contained, which can lead to labour shortages and challenges matching jobs to skills. Reliance on the transport network to connect people to services and vice versa, but limitations of the network make such journeys long and expensive. Very low travel volumes make the delivery of transport services expensive. Scope for active travel between settlements can be limited. And also transport poverty is prevalent and can limit the ability to access essential services, also a push factor in out-migration, so the loss of our younger people. There are extreme winter to summer differentials in travel in the region, with transport infrastructure often overwhelmed in the summer, as we see all too frequently with ferry services. And just to touch on the picture in the slide, the region derives a proportionally lower benefit from national policies and funding streams like the National Concessionary Travel Scheme. And that's not just for the under-22s, but it's very, very clear in terms of the exclusion of ferries from the scheme, and the benefits that brings. But the past data on the over 60s concessionary travel card has shown that an Edinburgh person cardholder will use their card up to 8 times more frequently than an Orcadian, or up to 7 times more frequently than somebody from the Western Isles. So that rather highlights where the benefit is much more urban focused. Conscious of time, I'll scan through what the RTS objectives are, but I'm conscious I'm sharing the presentation. But it's we have six objectives in total that try and capture and present what we're seeing in the strategy. I just want to have a bit of time just to talk about what we Hightrans are doing against some of the modes. In setting an objective in our RTS that seeks to ensure reliable, resilient, affordable and sustainable connectivity to all from and to our island, peninsular and remote communities, we recognise that this needs regular and affordable air services. In the past, we've had a policy that every part of Scotland should be given the opportunity of doing a day's business in the Central Belt and from the Central Belt to there at an affordable cost to the traveller. This seems to be a fair aspiration today. This means that we need to work together with our regional partners to ensure that the benefits of the Highlands and Islands air passenger duty differential continues as a way of balancing the geographic challenge of the region. We should also remain open to a wider use of the PSO mechanism to secure air frequency at an affordable fare for passengers. Hightrans, as a partner in the Sustainable Aviation Test Environment Project, are very close to this pioneering project, which has the ambition of testing the decarbonised solutions that are now coming through for aviation. The main activity is around Kirkwall Airport, but it is likely to touch on every high Isle airport. And I've already seen some evidence coming out from some of the tested projects that they really could become a reality by the end of the current decade. Ferry services. We may come back to this in the questions, I'm sure. In these islands, we've not been short of our transport challenges. The issue we see with our ferry services should not be a surprise to us. Whether we reflect on the concerns we at Hightrans raised in our strategic sea crossing study of 2005, whose key finding was that the medium vessel age at that time of 15 to 16 years would require at least one and sometimes two new vessels to be built each year, and that over half the fleet would need to be replaced between then and 2015. That this did not happen is well known. Hightrans work hard with our partner councils to capture evidence to support the need for investment in ferry services, and where that investment should be targeted for best results. We've not always been listened to, but when we have not been, the results have spoken for themselves. A clear, unanimous local voice called for a two ferry solution for Stornoway. Instead, we got a single large ferry and lost the second freight ferry. For the Little Minch, we completed work in 2010 that set out the case for a dedicated ferry on each route and suggested the potential for alternative skyports. This was again ignored with the continuation of the single vessel from Uig, which was innovation in 1964, but not nearly 50 years on. Fortunately, the very positive decision to change course and order the two new ferries now in build in Turkey can be considered a positive sign that CMAL in particular are listening. There is no doubt that the 4 Turkish-built ferries and the 2 Port Glasgow ones will make a huge difference to many of the resilience issues we have faced, but the fleet investment must continue to ensure we have the vessels to deliver the service levels we need today. A replacement for the Lottie and the Boysdale service and the Isle of Lewis and the Barra route need to be progressing, particularly Lottie replacement, given her age and the operating constraints of Malig. Hightrans led the socio-economic business case work that has proven that increasing service levels in both sounds will deliver strong benefits to the island's economy. Ferry services have done little for the blood pressure of many of us in the room today, but I think the collective effort of organisations, businesses and island communities to make the case for these lifeline routes are a really good example of how we can work in partnership to make the case for our island's future. On active travel, Hightrans has been working very closely with the Comhairle recently, and we had some very positive results from the Active Travel Transformation Fund. I'll not go into the detail of those, but I'm sure it's already been shared by colleagues at the Comhairle. And we've also been working with Comhairle officers around the regeneration of Loch Boysdale and improving the links between the village of Lochmaddy and the ferry terminal as part of the new ferry terminal project. And on travel information, we are working on a number of projects that hopefully will make it easier for people to find their way around. Our Scottish Islands Passport project is encouraging people to travel to the islands, but it has a particular focus on slow tourism and visiting islands outside peak season. In partnership with the Comhairle, we've recently employed a Lewis-based member of staff who will focus on supporting the provision of public transport information to real-time screens like the one on Cromwell Street that is showing scheduled-only information at the moment, but will hopefully move to real-time, and timetable information at more bus stops from the bus to Barra. I've also been in discussion with Transport Scotland around making it possible to get real-time information paid for by Transport Scotland on behalf of operators who don't currently benefit from that service. So I'll stop there because I don't want to take up all of the time with me blathering on. So thank you very much for listening. Morning, thank.
Morning, thank you, Ronald. Question, will Kish take the news to be?
Thank you, Chair.
George.
Any pressure been brought to bear or negotiation with CityLink? Social media is full almost every day of one bus going to or from Ullapool and people looking for lifts, people quite desperate on some occasions, and a refusal to put on a second bus unless that can be borne differently. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. There is actually. So Councillor Robertson flagged the issue. So in the past, the Comhairle and Hightrans had underwritten the provision of duplicate coaches, so they would be put on much closer to sailing time. There had been an issue about 3 or 4 years ago where this wasn't happening. So we agreed to underwrite buses right up to 24 hours before, if they could arrange them so that they would be available on the day. And if they didn't fill up, we'd take the hit. We never had to take the hit. So I've checked on the back of Councillor Robertson chasing me for this after members had raised it with him. The arrangement is still in place. I don't know whether operationally it had slipped a little. The explanation I've had from Scottish CityLink is that it's proving more difficult for them to get coaches that little bit closer to sailing day than was the case in the past. We've seen in the cruise liner traffic around Invergordon has grown again, and there have been acute driver shortages in and around Inverness. So I think that probably, as I understand it, the driver shortage issue, which really fell on the back of the combination of the pandemic and Brexit. So a lot of people who were early retired and driving a bus decided they didn't want to go back to driving a bus post-pandemic, which is understandable. But the assurance I've had from Scottish CityLink is they're going to have a look at the protocols, review these, and my own feeling would be that maybe 24 hours before sailing time is too late for them to be looking, and we do need to take a bit of a bigger risk ourselves on underwriting coaches being put on duplicates maybe 48 or 72 hours before, but it's something that's been looked at, and hopefully there'll be less of the concerns in social media moving forward.
Malcolm.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Ronald, for that very clear presentation. This is the strategic funding question, I suppose. Really, what are the links between the regional transport strategies and Transport Scotland's funding priorities? I mean, I know you would be competing, as it were, against every other regional transport strategy in Scotland, but it would be good to know how that's linked, and I presume it is, into Transport Scotland's priorities, given the reducing amount of public funding available. Thank you.
An excellent question, Malcolm. Thank you. So I think first up, one aspect that our regional transport strategy requires is ministerial sign-off. And again, I don't think that guarantees anything, but that's in the formalities of the process. I think it's important. So we actually refreshed our regional transport strategy in 2016, 2017 through 2018 and did not get ministerial sign-off because new ministers came in, as they often do. I think at that time it was actually Michael Matheson coming in. And the decision was taken not to sign off any new regional transport strategies because they wanted to complete the national transport strategy, which, as you'll see, we're now much more closely aligning to. That's what they wanted us to do. That's what they asked us to do. We've also had STPR moving along, and we had real concerns about STPR because it focused purely on Transport Scotland's own assets and infrastructure, which we don't consider correct. We consider the Western Isle spinal route should be given the same consideration as any other route that has that function in the country. So hopefully our RTS at least provides a place for these regionally significant projects to be argued for, but it is no guarantee of funding following. And we know the current state of public finance. We've actually seen some really positive progress around the local government funded ferry services. I know I had a moan about the capital needs of those services, but after many, many years, the revenue needs are now being met, and that has been a key priority that we have worked across local authorities as well to make a collective effort on. So I think that gives us some hope, but it does still feel as if the spinal route, the Ballasher Causeway, or these types of projects as they come along, we've been there with the Bernard Bridge, don't necessarily get the recognition it falls into. That's a local authority responsibility. So whether it's advocating for more funding in the local government settlement for our authorities, but at least it provides a statutory document. I think the statutory status of it is important.
Thank you very much.
Malcolm,
I was going to beg one supplementary, Chair.
you get us all a second.
Thank you. It seems to me that at a time, we're all committed to cooperation and collaboration and sharing resource, and that's commendable. And you mentioned works like Ballasher Causeway, which we could never undertake singly, but the total pot is reducing. So I'm I'm trying to think of a mechanism whereby we can at least structure some of these works into a programme and look at collective collaborative funding to make some of them happen. But I take it that. So my question is that also on the table in your links with Transport Scotland and government?
So, in a way, I think it's more focusing on that's something that we need to see happen. We saw it in the past with the ERDF, where again we saw Hightrans were able to put some funding in alongside the Comhairle to do some of and to draw down ERDF funding through the Highlands and Islands Partnership Programme. That saw 2 or 3 of the sections, the Cleasham section of the spinal route delivered, and I think one of the Leverburgh ones as well. So I think we've got a model that we can make the case for. I'm not sure I would say that I have a listening ear at Transport Scotland for that. So I think it's really important that when we do draw together the regional transport strategy, we make that sort of case. It feels to me as UK shared prosperity funding or whatever it's going to be called moving forward, if there is going to be something in there, it feels as if that needs to recognise transport as an issue, which it doesn't properly recognise today. And I think if we were able to understand and plan for some of these big projects, whether it's that type of funding, whether there's going to be anything from Scottish Government that reflects that we don't have ERDF anymore, but I think something needs to give on that front. So we'll certainly, and we'd be very, very happy to take our pointers on that as well, because, you know, there'll be much greater knowledge. I know it's been discussed at the Regional Economic Partnership as well, so I know that. One example, though, where we've had some recent success is around active travel funding, which has a backdrop of an increasing funding commitment, a commitment to make it 10% of the budget, and currently an aim to move to £325 million of annual funding for that, where I think the centralised way of delivery is actually being moved away from, and we have an opportunity to push towards a more regional and locally led model. So hopefully that's a sign of where there is some more money to spend, but of course that's not the case, generally speaking, across transport funding. So
Thank you, Chair.
Remit moves on this.
Thanks, Chair. I was going to ask about the spinal route again. It's something we talked about in here about 5-6 years ago as part of our wish list for when Scottish Government had high ambitions to spend £1 billion or whatever it was. I think given the lack of ambition shown with the A9 and the commitment to help with the rest and be thankful, our spinal route is probably going to be low on their list of priorities as much as it's needed. But I'll go back to Councillor Murray's previous point about the buses. When I was, you used to get fed up of me sending him emails and used to then sending you emails about the bus. Like George said, it's one of these things that kept coming up on social media, and I was led to believe, were committed to funding the second bus. And obviously there are issues with drivers and buses and the timescale involved in setting up a bus at short notice. Surely, given the technology available just now to everybody, when somebody books a ticket as a ferry passenger, 95% of them will have known days in advance when they're travelling and will they need a bus. So can that technology not be harnessed to predict demand for a bus and utilised to give CityLink, whoever, the opportunity to provide that second bus? I was going to say it's not rocket science, but you know, possibly it might be rocket science given CalMac's inability to actually deliver their new system for booking, etc. You know, this might just blow the thing out of the water. You know, something as complicated as putting on a second bus. So I'm at a loss to understand how we can't predict travel plans for passengers who have, I would suggest 95% of the time, made their arrangements well in advance of 72 hours. They know they're going to go as a food passenger on a ferry. That could surely be requested at the point of booking the ticket. Will you need a bus ticket as well? It doesn't seem to be, the thinking isn't joined up. It shouldn't be that difficult.
So
don't know if it's your question.
no, it is. It is. It's actually, it's a great question for me. It's a wonderful one, but I'm not, I'm conscious I'm also about to throw others under the bus. If that's at least I'm sticking to my topic. So the technology's there. So I think there is an issue though, just to be a wee bit fair to the way that the system works just now, that people don't book their bus very far in advance. So I think that David, it's never cost us anything. David will correct me if I'm wrong, but we've never actually had to pay for underwriting the booking, which is up to 24 hours beforehand, which does, as I said, give a bit of a small window, I think, for them if there is an issue with coaches and drivers. If we did that earlier, but that's at the point that the bus is getting full, the one bus, the first bus. It's not 3 days before, that's a day before. So people aren't booking the bus, and they could be booking the bus, but there have been issues as well with people trying to book and not getting booked. In terms of the technology to book the ferry and the bus at the same time, we've got it today. Hightrans has launched in June 2021, we launched an app called GoHi that lets you plan, book and pay for bus, train, ferry, e-bike, folding bike, car club, all in the one app. It doesn't include all ferry. It doesn't actually fully include Scottish CityLink, so I should actually caution that we haven't managed to finish that integration, but that's happening. So we're just about there, and Scottish CityLink have done everything we needed them to do to have their service available in that app. But we don't have CalMac, and we don't have a prospect of CalMac. So we're trying to speak to CalMac. We've got a meeting scheduled in July to find out how long it would take and what developments they would need to make on their new booking system. So the current booking system doesn't allow the ability for a third party to retail a CalMac ticket through their technology. So we've got the technology in place that should allow you to sort your booking out for your ferry and at the same time book. And it's now available on Circle Northlink ferries, but it's not available in CalMac. We went live in Circle Northlink in December last year. So the technology's there, and we're really, really keen to get that technology onto CalMac as well. And when we've got that, we will push that line, because I think that's something that we should be doing. But all we'll be doing with it within that app is allowing you to do it in one place. You can currently book your CalMac trip, and you can book your Scottish CityLink, and the sooner you do it, the better, I think. But I appreciate plans change, and you do need to travel at the last minute. And what we want to do is get to a point where people book as far ahead as possible, and our underwriting kicks in to manage the people who just have to travel at the last minute as a food passenger to Ullapool and get on then. So hopefully we'll get there, but the technology's there. It's just, we're reliant on other people's technology to make it work as best as it can. And CalMac are clearly a really important part of the solution for this area.
Yeah, I would suggest the fact that we've offered to underfund, to fund a second person. We haven't spent a penny. Speaks volumes.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Donald, for your presentation. You mentioned earlier about having the listening ear of Transport Scotland. What influence do you feel the authority really has in terms of its dialogue with the Scottish Government and with Scottish ministers? Do you feel you require more powers? Or, we're talking about public service reform going forward and devolving more power to local authorities. Do you feel that your authority would want to take part in that discussion and debate about not just a strategic kind of vision, but having actually the powers to implement policy?
Absolutely, yes. I think, and I think for any organisation, we're not a young organisation. So while we've been around since 2005 as a statutory body, we've been around since 1998. In some guise or another, coming through the Convention of the Highlands and Islands as a voluntary organisation until the statutory status kicked in. There is provision within the Act for regional transport partnerships to take on additional powers. And it's actually quite a simple process. It's seen as taking on the responsibility for public transport information provision. But I do think we should be making the case for more of our services to be managed at a more local level and a regional level. And for our part, we actually submitted proposals to the local government's review Democracy Matters work stream. I think they got very, very few suggestions of pilots that made it in the just before Boris Johnson announced lockdown deadline for that, and nothing has happened. We have engaged with Transport Scotland and government around their acknowledgement in the National Transport Strategy that we need to have a review of transport governance. Work has been completed by Jacobs independently on behalf of Transport Scotland that said there should be a stronger regional role in the delivery of these services. And unfortunately, that work was paused indefinitely by the last minister for, I think, understandable reasons when things were, her attention was very, very much diverted on the issues that we've been facing with CalMac. I would hope that we can come back to that work and make the case for a stronger regional voice and role. Whether that's a Hi-Trans voice or role or somebody else, I don't know. But I do think that we could better manage a large share of the services that we rely on from closer to home.
Very briefly, in that context, with our new transport minister, would you be looking forward to a regular dialogue with at that level, political level?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important that, and I think if we can have that relationship at with the minister themselves, I think that's a helpful way of doing it. Rather than it being through the civil service. I think, and we've actually had in terms of, by comparison to other regional transport partnerships, our colleagues at the other 6 regional transport partnerships get a little bit jealous of Hi-Trans because we seem to have more contact with ministers than any of them. But I'm not sure Councillor Robertson particularly, feels lucky that he's had such regular dialogue with Ms. Gilruth or Mr. Stewart around matters like Uig Pier, Hebrides mezzanine deck, or the Lottie being out of service. But it does mean that at least we can form those relationships and try and build on those into showing that we can help with pragmatic solutions.
Energy.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome, Ronald, and very good to see you in the chamber. My question is regards synchronised timetables for trains and buses from particularly Oban and Malik, where you can come in a ferry and the train or the buses has just left. I know this has been raised many times and many levels. Is there anything we can actually do to rectify that using Norris apps and technology and booking systems and the way forward that we should be able to have a synchronized travel system?
I think there's a lot more we can do. I think we've seen connections at Oban in particular have become worse over the last few months. I think we've got quite a few instances of connections that just physically can't be made. I actually can't remember. I've seen a lot more feedback from Mull than I have from Barra. So I don't know if the Barra connections are slightly better. And of course, we know that we've seen what's happened at Malig, and recently we've had issues at Malig around the Small Isles connections being made a bit worse as well. I think it's difficult to comment on what the Loch Boysdale connections at Malig have looked like. So I'll stop there. But we had the work in the past that yourself and Councillor Steele led on in trying to capture the community view around what times we could have for ferries to enhance the ability to connect. And we do have to work through the CalMac system about how they do their side of things. I think, in fairness to ScotRail, it can be more challenging. So they've basically never changed anything. And they have to manage the flow of traffic into Queen Street. If all the trains stopped in Dumbarton from the west, it would probably be easier for them, but then you don't really want to be changing at Dumbarton. So I do think it's something that we need to keep a really good focus on, make the case for improving connections. Hopefully ferry services will improve and increase in frequency so that the connections are easier to match to sometimes as well. I think the shared use of ferries don't help, but I do think we can make it a lot easier. And on this side as well, we've developed a new digital platform for booking demand responsive transport services. So if we could maybe move to more of those sorts of services, then that might offer a way for people to book at the times that they want. So the bus will naturally flow into connecting with the ferries as well. But I do acknowledge that I don't think it's necessarily got better. If anything, it's got worse. With some extended turnaround times on ferries that have broken a few connections at Malig. I think the Loch Frisa has had a bit of an impact on the Mull timetable as well because of her longer sailing times. But I think it's important that we just keep a really strong focus on that. And I don't think there's enough of a local focus on that. Again, decisions are being taken from Gourock and Glasgow in the case of the trains and the ferries, rather than more locally. So I think it doesn't help.
Thank you.
Mustafa? You're muted, Mustafa.
That's the effect you have on me, Ushton, all the time, stopping me from speaking. Good morning. Thanks, Ranald, for your presentation. That was very informative. Just a question around the Active Travel Transformation Fund. You'll probably, the islands are probably becoming a victim of their success in terms of attracting a lot of cyclists and a lot of cyclist groups throughout the roads of the islands. And I'm sure you're probably aware of the statistics last year of the high proportion of death on mainland Scotland roads of cyclists and motorcyclists. And the question is around in terms of looking at what can we do more in terms of improving the infrastructure for cyclists, as well as, information around safety and all the things, because the frustration of the road user, the regular day road users around the cyclists sometimes can cause, some issues around safety. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mustafa. Good to see you. I think it's a good question. I think we've probably, we have seen increasing cycling rates in the Western Isles, and I've heard certainly some of the frustrations that people have had on single track sections of the road about that as well. I think we're now having an opportunity to catch up on investing in some of the infrastructure that can help people cycle safely and maybe reduce that frustration. In the years up to this year, the way that a lot of the active travel funding was made available was through a requirement to bid against other councils and to bid against other councils in a funding stream that was administered by the charity Sustrans called Places for Everyone. And it was pretty challenging. For me, it favoured the bigger councils that had the staff who could prepare applications and submit those. And consequently, the Comhairle got no funding at all from that funding stream. This year, we've moved to the Active Travel Transformation Fund, and by working in partnership with Hightrans and Comhairle staff, we've seen a really positive investment in measures that will include traffic calming measures at Willow Glen, new footway for the active travel route at North Street, the final section of pedestrian pathway at Tapost, and improving active travel access to Lewis Castle College. I think these developments are actually showing that we can start catching up here and putting in place the facilities that make it safer and easier for people to cycle. But I'd say this is very much, we're at ground zero here for actually putting the infrastructure in place that makes cycling work for people in these islands. But I think we can, we can do that. If you think, for me, if you look at sections of Old Road alongside the spinal route, can we make them available as active travel corridors? For me, the likes of the road at the back of Strumban, single track road, that the double track and the spinal route has left, for access to Peats, these sorts of routes could be a bit more useful as well as part of that. We've seen the Hebridean Way as an initiative that's helped people, do their leisure walking, including dog walking at 5 in the morning for some others in this chamber. So I do think that we've got a really good opportunity. I think that the demand is there to cycle, and I think we're seeing some really positive progress in the Western Isles now to put in place the measures that help with that.
Mustafa.
I'm fine, thanks very much, Houston.
Kenneth
Yeah.
McLean. Kenneth.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we're hearing you, Kenneth.
Hi there. Thanks for attending and giving us that presentation. You mentioned that the young people's concessionary travel is used, forgive me if I've remembered the stat wrong, but 8 times more in Edinburgh than it is out here. Has the Scottish Government acknowledged this? And more importantly, have they suggested a way to remedy that? And failing that, is there any way they could channel that funding towards us if they're not going to?
So it's their statistics. I think it's actually 6 times, so I might have over-egged it a bit. So if you apologies for that, Kenneth. But yes, they know it. That that there is an issue, and I think they have acknowledged that perhaps they need to investigate ways of delivering more fairness. They have got a fair fares review underway at the moment, and Hightrans prepared a piece of work to submit before that process began around some of the unfairness around fares that we are seeing at the moment that we would like to see looked at, including pricing, how much it would be to extend the very much back of an envelope pricing of how much it would cost to expand the under 22s free travel to ferries. And I think we had a figure of £3 million, which didn't seem too much in the context of £200 million or over £250 million for concessionary travel in the country. And I think that's maybe been acknowledged. We'll see when that Fair Fares review reports later this year if we've gained anything with that. We've also made the case for increased funding for rural bus services. The big commitment the government have made around bus services for a bus partnership fund, which which has as its focus bus priority. So making it easier for buses to get through congestion, which clearly doesn't feel like a very rural focused solution. And that's a £500 million pot. So again, we've made the case that there needs to be to counterbalance and provide services in rural areas where we've been seeing declining bus mileage. We need to see something. And at the moment, it's a relatively modest community bus fund that's being proposed, whose value will be about £3 million, but a lot of that's capital, not revenue. I think the revenue funding is only about £500,000, and if that is taken across Scotland, we'll not get anywhere. So yeah, we need to keep making the case, I think, for these sorts of issues, and that the more rural parts of the country aren't forgotten. But I think we are very alive to these issues, and when we get access to statistics like that in the National Concessionary Travel Scheme, it's really important that we use those to show where there's unfairness. So hopefully that's just an example of that from Hightrans.
Callum McAleoin. Callum.
Thanks, Chair, for letting me in. Thanks, Ronald, for your presentation. I find it very interesting and informative, especially to somebody who, like me, has questioned the function of Hightrans. It's been certainly very informative. I noticed that in your 4 priorities, you mentioned 2 of them: reducing inequalities and delivering inclusive economic growth in Scotland. I don't know if you would agree with me, but I would suggest that there is limited progress in 2 of these. That is, in reducing inequalities, if we're honest, to the islands, and delivering inclusive economic growth because of the problem we've had with the connectivity to the islands. Can I just mention 3 things that I pick up from your talk today that we seem to be having limited progress in as well, and that's to do with air services. Our air services are certainly not what they should be. Our ferries are certainly not what they should be. I'm sure Mr. Robertson would agree with that. They're far from it, and you're seeing that with what's happening down in the US at the moment. And our road structure, the roads, there's not enough finance going into our roads. And particularly when we look at, you mentioned yourself, at 2005, you started campaigning for new vessels and new ferries. You mentioned about the road structure. The A9 has not been dualled. The A96, which I hope to travel on today, is far from dualled. So these are two major ones. Just can I ask, what do you think the impact of Hightrans has been? What procedures or processes would you need to adopt in order for you to have more impact? Because I do feel that you mentioned yourself about a listening ear, and already Mr. Crichton mentioned about talking to ministers, I mean, having a discussion, which I'm sure you're having, but I would say that many of them are having a deaf ear. And is Transport Scotland, is it helping in any way? I'm sorry for being so negative, but maybe that's my nature of being negative, the negativity when it comes to transport issues in the Western Isles. But anyway, I'm grateful for your very informative talk, and I now realise the work you're doing. But these are a couple of questions, Ronald.
Yeah, no, that's not negative at all. I completely appreciate where you're coming from, Councillor McLean. The priorities that you mentioned aren't mine. That's the National Transport Strategy. That's the priorities set out by Government and Transport Scotland. So what we've tried to do is frame our regional transport strategy in a way that reflects them, but hopefully better presents them in the context of our own region. So it's really the strategy objectives that I talked through that are hopefully a bit more plain English than some of what you might see in a more national strategy, although we're probably a bit guilty of that ourselves. In terms of I'm glad that hopefully I've managed to present some of the value that we offer. In a pounds, shilling and pence sense, so we've done work in the past ourselves that has shown that for every penny each of our partner councils has put into Hightrans over the years, you've enjoyed 10 back on average. So, you know, primarily because most of our funding comes through Scottish Government, so you get a starting point. But we've then been able to draw down huge sums of European funding. We've secured UKRI funding, like I mentioned, through the Sustainable Aviation Test Environment Project. So I sort of think we're a small organisation, and I think that can be a bit lost on people as well. We're a small organisation of, you know, it ups and downs to, you know, 12 people or thereabouts. So we do what we can, but we do have ambition to do more. And I do think in terms of some of the work that we've talked through, I don't think I really focus too much on the recent work in making the case for improving service in the Sound of Harris or the Sound of Barra. But, you know, I think, you know, where we can act and where we can make the case and where we can listen to where there might be a point of pain to try and understand what we can do to address that, then I think that's what we're able to do just now. I do think we manage to influence pretty well. We do generally work pretty well with Transport Scotland. Of course, Transport Scotland are a big organisation, so, you know, we'll be dealing with teams in rail, roads, ferries, and aviation. Some of the, you know, the making change can take time. So, you know, going back to, you know, some of the interventions that we've had over the years and going back a good few years, similar to what we've done with the Ullapool buses, we also underwrote for 2 years the additional rotations on the Barra Glasgow PSO that then became set in stone within the PSO. So taking Barra up to the twice daily service from the single daily. So I think, you know, we've supported projects that have made a real difference for people. We've had to do that within a relatively limited funding envelope. If we had a larger funding envelope, hopefully we'd make a bigger difference as well. So, but that's not me asking the Comhairle for more funding. So before Malcolm falls off his chair in front of me. So it's just to say that, you know, we start off in quite a good place. One of the positives we've recently seen is a big increase in active travel funding. So for the council's 15,000 or so, or 19,000 or so, we tend to draw down about £1 million a year for active travel investment anyway. So from Transport Scotland, so you know we're starting in an ever stronger place on the return on investment we're able to give to our partner councils.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. A supplementary, Chair, just to come in on that, and this is my last supplementary. The impact of anything requires action. And while I agree with you that we've seen a fair bit of action on some aspects, there have been, if anything, negative action on other, or inaction, I should say, on others. We particularly talk about the connectivity to the islands, and the impact of that is having a negative impact on our demographics and our economic growth. So I'm just trying to emphasize that we need, in order to move things forward, we need to have impact, and the impact requires action. But thanks very much for your own work that you're doing yourselves.
Kenneth?
Apologies, last comments, last question. Well, it's more a comment. I just think it'd be remiss if I didn't bring this up with yourself, and it's something you'll be aware of anyway. But patient travel, in particular from Barra, is abysmal, to be frank. A lot more people used to be referred to Glasgow hospitals from here, but that has since changed, and it's almost exclusively up to Stornoway now. We've raised this with NHS; they don't seem too willing to change that. So I'm just sort of, again, it's not a question, just pointing out that there needs to be a better link between Barra and Stornoway, whether that's a flight to Benbecula to connect up or a flight direct. Again, and I know you're aware of this, but it's brought up daily here, and it would just be, I felt as though I should mention it. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm conscious that, Councillor, you recognise that it's an issue that we're aware of, and we have been involved in some of the discussions around that. I actually came away from a meeting, I think in January, quite optimistic that there might be opportunities to look at the basket of spare, of flights to be used, to maybe include some Barra Stornoways within that. I think for me, and I think it's important to recognise that patient travel, the overland option, even if it did work better, is a very, very arduous and long journey that we'd be landing on people. So I think we should be finding an air option. Clearly, the PSO I think is live today, but I do think if more appointments are being scheduled in Stornoway from Barra, then that would suggest a demand that we should be looking at. I think Loganair certainly seemed open to having a discussion and a dialogue around how they could better serve those that Barra to Stornoway need. I would hope that we can keep those discussions going, because it seems to me as if a solution exists. What is a challenge is, as ever, finance. But if we at least had maybe a bit of an open dialogue around that, perhaps we could get somewhere. But I do get that you absolutely recognise that that was the case and that we had that awareness. But hopefully that is something that we can solve.
Nu is je giste me hier. Nu is Angus. Si tu, a bhfuil noch go, sé a kiiste go. Róg a réit mi. Oh, I'm smoking near. Continues to be anybody else online can hear Angus or me.
Can hear
No,
you, but we can't hear
can't hear
Angus.
him.
No, we can't hear him.
Well, Shergan close it on I'm making Kate Mille Tanger or fit to Fuyoch, Polish toch give news, yes, son. Okay. Right. Kate Mille Tanger, die is Kirsten Kaleur, shit, I could I'm a dog was poorly and Karen Sassik, in the Flickerston, who could share. Viva, Puspere Co, Adish, Rianach, Gianatus, Davil, Richet, go 3 Richet, so we agus Bunstructor, agus Shilvision, Carl, Rai, Kate, Hanasho, son Fisrach, agus a Dorsch Tashheller, a Rundin, Hidevish for Smach, and less Arstoff again, and the Davy Comedy Call, agus Bunstructor, a Rai, Kate, agus Brini Columach, agus Davy MacLeod is an áis agus fictiad Kirsten Sabee agus Colum and Dosha.
Thank you, Chair. The report has quite a bit of information in it, but I think I'll focus on 2 aspects. One's on the local government benchmark framework results for 2021-22, and I'll also touch on the financial end-of-year position for assets and infrastructure. So I think first of all, looking at the performance results in the benchmarking framework, you'll find that in the appendix to the report. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this. It's quite a detailed table that's there in front of you. I will just highlight a couple of things from there. You'll see there's a line there on the cost of roads per kilometre, where this reflects the budget that's available rather than the amount of money that we need. So sometimes people can look at this as being good news that we're spending less money on our roads infrastructure, when in fact these figures in front of you are the budgets. You'll see that over the 12-year period that there's been a 60% reduction in spend on roads. If we go further on down the table, you'll see the percentage of A-class roads which should be considered for maintenance treatment. The first few years of that 12-year period, we did have additional capital to invest in our roads, and you can see a slight improvement in the roads condition from these results. And indeed, most of our investment over the past years have been on A-class roads. Basically, and we can touch on this in the next report on roads investment, where our prioritization is for roads that have a large volume of traffic and have higher speeds. So you can see that A-class roads over the and again, I've got to clarify that these are the results for 21-22. These work a year behind. B-class roads are showing a deterioration, as are C-class roads. In terms of corporate assets and proportion of buildings that are suitable and are of satisfactory condition, there's a couple of lines there just to highlight, where there's been a general improvement over these years in suitability and condition. We have invested in schools and in care homes over the past number of years, and that's improved our figures. So that's all I'll touch on really on the framework, benchmarking framework results. Finance, the figures weren't available when the report was published, but you will see that there will be a further report to Policy and Resources on the revenue outturn. As far as property and infrastructure goes, we've had an overspend of £737,000 on winter maintenance. That's usually met from corporate resources or reserves. Overall, there's been an underspend of £117,000. However, there's some ups and downs in some of these figures which we need to account for. There was a £121,000 underspend on roads. However, £95,000 of that is accounted for in work that we need to do, or we've committed to for Arnold Bridge. And there's also some Transport Scotland initiatives that we're still working on at the budget as to roll over for. So basically, the roads budget is about break even. We've got some vacancies in business support and IT, which has led to some underspends. And in IT as well, there's a couple of projects in telephony and infrastructure that we are still yet to deliver on. The main items of overspend have been on property maintenance. So our repairs and maintenance budget has been overspent by £250,000. And the building projects team are overspent by 194,000, which is basically a failure to meet income targets because of the lack of capital. I'm happy to stop there and take any questions that members may have.
Sheikh, wel ceist ag dyn sy'n bi. Ronald Racer.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I have a question relating to paragraph 11.5 in the report pertaining to bridge works and maintenance. I note that within that report it states that market forces will likely affect the scope of work originally envisaged from the £6.6 million that Comhairle was awarded in the recent past. I wonder, Chair, could the Director provide the committee with any illustrative information as to which works might or could be affected by this downscaling?
Callum.
Yes, we've been working through the number of projects that we were funded for. Initial estimates were given before COVID and before the other economic pressures on construction. So we've managed to deliver all of the projects. We've got as far as the Lochanob project in Barra, which we can deliver. It's come in over our budget. However, within the allocation we have, we can deliver that project. The next project on the list was the North Ford Works in between Benbecula and Grimsey. That work may not be able to progress based on the budget we have left. We would intend to go back to Scottish Government with the reasoning that the funding that we were initially given was pre these increases in construction costs to see if we can get some additional funding to do that work. One of the reasons for the Lochanob project in Barra being overspent is that there's a fibre optic cable that needs to be realigned by BT Openreach, which is costing in the region of £95,000.
Arnold, will you tell us a shit?
Yeah. That's fine. Thank you, Chair, for that. And Callum.
Wel ceist ag dyn sy'n bi erla. And Neil, David.
Thank you, Chair. From Municipal Services perspective, we have, again, the financial figures, the detailed financial figures weren't available at the time of writing the report, but we have been able to operate financially quite well this year. The impact of increased residual waste over the year that we had been experiencing during COVID and post-COVID seems to have settled, and our landfill tax liability ourselves has settled down to what we would normally expect. Generally a break-even position, including the repayment of the overspend from last year, and we didn't have to draw down the full amount to fund the uplift for the subsidy adjuster on the bus contracts, which was quite good. We had two off targets, as in yellow, KPIs. One of them related to waste strategy, which, given the suspension or the postponement of DRS to 2025, that's something that is delaying our implementation of a revised strategy. That should have a good positive effect here. We're also anticipating additional funding from extended producer responsibility with an island calculated financial intervention for us to allow it to match up our costs. That should start next financial year, but we don't have details yet, but we're certainly involved in the process. The rollout of the new curbside service, there is a report to this committee later on the agenda. That started on the 29th of May. We are still waiting for the new RCV, the electric RCV that was funded from the RIF, Scottish Government Recycling Improvement Fund. We are hopeful that it will be here by the end of the month, but we have been told that both in March, April, May and now June. But at least it is in the UK and it's going through the vehicle registration process as we speak. That will certainly give us a wee bit more capacity. It is reflective of vehicles in general. We're still waiting for the delivery of the two new hook lift lorries. We had expected them in April 2022, then April 2023. We're now looking at potentially end of August before we get them. But that would definitely appreciate their arrival. We're still in discussions with Zero Waste Scotland, looking at options for the 2025 ban on biodegradable municipal waste from landfill. The stumbling block, as always, is access to ferry capacity. If you're talking about an average of about 2 Arctics a day of waste, and then if you have delays or cancellations, then that can exacerbate the problem. So we are working with them and see if we can come up with a solution, and maybe by the time we get closer to 2025, we'll have something a bit more positive on access to capacity. There is another report on the proposal to look at pre-treatment of waste for market stance. That waste already goes on a ferry on the Sound of Harris, but if we can reduce the weight and volume by 50%, that would be 50% less material on a ferry, and if we can get it to the mainland from energy from waste, that deals with the 2025 ban in terms of the waste from use and Barra. A bit of good news on the funding side. We managed to successfully bid for funding to the EETF fund for hydrogen, and it's a £2.2 million project that will be based out at Creed that will allow us to move forward with hydrogen production, involve UHI locally in training opportunities, further training opportunities for hydrogen technicians with fully accredited course work that would be available for anybody really throughout Scotland. And I think the essential thing is to give us hydrogen production again, to allow us to start developing the work that we've been sort of trying to progress since about 2008. In terms of our KPI targets, we are still achieving a recycling rate of more than 30%, and we expect that to improve with the launch of the curbside collection service to every house in Lewis and Harris, because there was still about 6 routes that didn't have that service. Happy to take any questions.
David, wel ceistig dyn sy'n mi, David. Colin?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Chair. It's to David. David, you mentioned hydrogen production at the Creed Park. From what would you anticipate the hydrogen to be developed from? I'm just interested in finding how a hydrogen development, how much are you thinking of producing and how?
David?
Thank you, Chair. It's using an electrolyzer to electrolyze water to produce hydrogen and hopefully capture the oxygen as well. We have had a small electrolyzer in place since 2008 with a refueler. Unfortunately, small hydrogen electrolyzers tend to be more or less prototypes, so they have not proved the most reliable of technology. Part of this project is to allow an opportunity for new small-scale electrolyzers to be tested in working with UHI locally and ourselves to have a facility that you can actually do that. But we would hopefully gain some advantage in having additional small electrolyzers that we can use to produce hydrogen ourselves, and we have the capacity there to capture, store, and refuel at the Creed at the moment. Our problem at the moment is that our electrolyzer, which went in 2008, is currently not functioning, and this project will address that. So in terms of quantity, we'd be looking to have enough to start rolling out additional diesel hydrogen hybrids like the one we have on one refuse collection vehicle, looking at that as a precursor to fuel cell technology, but as really a stepping stone to that, rather than fuel cell technology is good, but you need a lot of secure hydrogen production before you would really take that risk on an island. The diesel hydrogen, like a hybrid electric petrol car, it's a sort of transition. It allows you to move forward with hydrogen, but without having the problem that if you don't have any hydrogen, the vehicle doesn't work.
Well, very good, very interesting.
Yes,
I was saying that, a very interesting development. Be very interested to see what comes of it. Well done.
Definitely. Durgo yari news makara mek lave ke khushi some tikshin na kishte ke tulu. Kishte tenis bit David na the Harlemanisht. Daniel, Cleva, Bulpuila kundige an askast van jaar. Ta believe. Nest bors na Eilean, han gusper lennis is on pech na comedy for glistenis maar wors na Eilean. An ask show is on visserige, de kunde sig ask nech enemichte davile gaherichet, aus a kurpanier kar plana kniev begonju ask, nech enemichte gaherichet, driedichet, aus bini kajach, moesten is an ask, aus friktie kisten be. Kan ich?
Thank you, Chair. Just in regards of the report, point you to paragraph 6.3 there, that just an update that I've reported there that there's delays in clearing the required area at Meaveg, and that continues to be a problem, but we're pursuing your options. Chair, if you'll allow me just a couple of items to update in regards to another, it's not on the report, but it's to do with Callan. Just to say that work is starting in Callan next week on demolition of a former live storage shed. I think as members will be aware, Callan has been a victim of its own success over the years, and it's got very busy and a lot of traffic in there. So this demolition of the shed will kind of create a good bit of space in there. So contractor coming on site on Monday. We haven't really got the time frame or the completion yet, but we're looking just a few weeks. And the other thing is that Callan fuel tank. Again, there's been issues at Callan in terms of the speed of the fuel tank there, but we're now installing a new fuel tank with bigger pumps that will allow the bigger boats to take fuel faster. So the new fuel tank is due
expected on the 24th of June, so that's next week to be installed. So some couple of good news for Callan, but I'll take any questions on the report. Thank you.
Applet kan ich maken lokent te steunen toe. Hashtag dan is erbij. Wanneer we verpoeilen kundige gaan aanschaf wanneer we dat blijft roten en nest. Bivren in haske aan roten tawile triedig het gehochte dicht. Aan aanschaf de gunte die runnig uitstellen het moon kalappen is een roten uit puntstructe. Gegelte maar vast te vroegen kalappen tawile triedig het gehochte dicht. Eilean, do vín sin náis go chéir míid Callan pick an nachlan ar dosha.
Thank you, Chair. There's quite a lot of detail in the body of this report, which colleague Colin McKeever can answer questions on. In terms of the recommendations, what we're looking for in 3.1a is for the annual distribution of the £5.5 million capital allocation that we've been given. So that's in the table in the report. B is looking for agreement of the prioritisation and delivery approach that we have, and the output of this is in appendices 1 and 2 to the report. Appendix 2 is relating to this year's surface dressing programme. The third recommendation there, in terms of having a MOUG to discuss future investment in roads, is really on the back of the success of the winter maintenance MOUG that we had, where officers could better represent the operational financial difficulties that we face. That the MOUG could be a place for us as well to be able to engage with members to discuss the operational difficulties, as well as some of the options we have to improve the road structure. So some of the questions we're frequently asked are round about surface dressing and overlay, where surface dressing is going on just now, and that's a mechanism that we use to seal what's a pretty good condition road just now, but to protect it for the future. It also gives a better skid resistance as well on that surface of road. Some people may complain and say, well, that's not the worst condition road that you're treating, but what it does is it protects a significant portion of our current roads infrastructure into the future. We're aware there's a lot of roads out there that have surface defects on. These just are not suitable for surface dressing. So it's this kind of conversation that we'd like to encourage at a future MOUG, to look at these operational difficulties, operational opportunities as well. We've recently invested in a road mender after hiring one for a period of time, which gives us a higher degree of success in some of the defects that we are fixing on the road. So I think I'll stop there, Chair, but that's the purpose of the recommendations of the report, and Colin can give a bit more detail on the body if that's required.
Zo'n kiste eindig met ik Eilean is die vín met jou naast gewoon.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't mean to be parochial, but I'm going to be on this item.
Kun je gewoon Eilean het daar vín met naast?
All right.
Dus zo'n voor je
Okay.
bij Tisha.
Good to hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Eilean?
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Chair. Excuse me. The report tries to set out some of the challenges facing the road maintenance activity. The main challenges being an aging and deteriorating network. Excuse me. And reducing budgets. The budgets have been reducing over several years, as you'll all be aware. The road also details the proposed approach that we intend to take with regard to the allocation of the 5.5 million budget across all the different asset strands that make up the road's asset. As Carla said, there's a fair bit of detail in the report. the main change really with regards to carriageways themselves will be a move away from how the overlay approach that we've taken in previous years, which is to try and overlay large sections of road. The budget just isn't sufficient to support that approach anymore. We've also had use of the Vaisala AI, road AI system this year when we've been doing the roads inspection, where we drove the whole road network from Butt to Barra using this system, which has allowed us to capture all of the defect detail on an online system, which allows us to interrogate it in much more detail than we used to be able to. This has allowed us to take a more localized view on the defects that we're seeing, and which in turn allows us to spread the limited budget further across the network. So as Calla mentioned, we have systems such as the road mender, we have ways of
Callan, being stuff and bank cafe on the
oh, my apologies. Yep, the road mender system allows us to it's another strand of maintenance approach basically. So we have road mender, there's planned hotbox patching, minor overlay patching, edge protection, which is a significant issue around the network where the road edges are starting to fail and forcing the traffic together, and pre-surface dressing patching. All of these methods would allow us to get as wide a spread as we possibly can from the limited budget we have, and we would look to try and follow on year one. We would look to try and follow these interventions with surface dressing to fully seal that section of road for the future. That's pretty much all I have to say, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Chairman. I didn't catch much of that, I'm afraid, but like I said, I don't mean to be parochial, but I've been happy to be. When I read this report and the list that's been outlined for us, my heart sank. And I'm going to raise the condition of the Tongue Village Road, which is fast becoming irrecoverable, really, in terms of its condition. And I understand and appreciate that officers have to go through a very rigorous assessment and to come up with this, and are working under constrained financial situations. But I'm just looking for a glimmer of hope that, you know, we can revisit this list. I mean, I see Goat Hill mentioned, Goat Hill Road mentioned. I can't imagine Mr. Burr and Mr. McKenzie having to negotiate the potholes that residents of Tongue Village have to every day. So I'd be grateful if you could, Mr. McKenzie, perhaps give some hope that this issue will be addressed, because, like I said, its condition, if it's not addressed soon, it will be beyond repair.
Como solo secretaria que mutilhas. Como solo secretaria, could you get? Could you see yes, solo secretary? Column to in.
Councillor Crichton, I'm sure every member in this chamber will have the same issue as you have yourself. We have, as you can see, so limited funding that this is the best that we can do with the money that we have. What we will be doing, as Colin mentioned, is in the past when we had a bit more money, we were able to do longer sections. The rest of that, I think that's that bit dealt with. There are many more sections of road, and as Colin mentioned, we've driven every single road in the Western Isles in the last few months. We've got the information that's come from the camera on that, and we've gone through that. So this is the output of these deliberations. And what I can't do in this chamber is give anybody assurances that, yes, that particular issue will be dealt with within a certain timescale. What all we can do just now is revisit the areas and fix as we can with either pothole repairs, with a jet patcher, with a mender. But when it comes to major investment in actual tar, we would love to have that kind of facility to be able to go and run layers of tar over these roads, but we simply don't have that resource.
John, there's on Tilly Ash.
That's a good point or something.
No, can't Karen Shara. Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I share Councillor Crichton's frustrations when I see this appendix in front of us. I am somewhat surprised that I'm not seeing part of the main spinal route, particularly from Cameron Terrace to Laxey on this, but it's not been scored. Given the volume of traffic that is on this road, we've spoken in Ronald's presentation about road safety and active travel. The volume of cyclists that are on that road this year are far increased to any other year I've seen. They're actually moving out off the verges because the verges are so broken on the road. And it is going to cause a problem. We have had a lot of accidents on these corners over the last number of years. And it does surprise me that, you know, I know every area will have the same, but it does surprise me that the Sowell Bends particularly, and the bit from Cameron Terrace to the Sowell Bends hasn't been considered in this overlay programme here. I would like maybe more information about how it was weighted, because if they have driven over it, I drive it every day and I see it for myself. You know, it is for a main spinal part of the main spinal route, it is not a good part of the road to drive on. I tell you, the condition is going to get worse.
Who was all this like a days? How will you go? Yeah. You could be something in Ash.
Well, I can ask Colin if it's any detail on that, but I mean, we could get into that kind of conversation from every member here today, because there are areas that you go over yourselves that you see are in need of repair or mending. Other members would be going over other areas of road. I go over areas of road myself. I've done a bit of traveling through US over the last week as well, and there are areas where I'm unhappy with the condition of the roads, but all I can do is do the repairs that we can afford to do as we can. We just don't have the luxury to run a length or overlay over large sections anymore. And as Colin was mentioning, if we can break down these areas into edge protection, you know, if that's the main area, the thing that section of road needs, rather than doing the whole carriageway, that's the strategy we're looking at adopting. I don't know, Colin, is there anything you can add on the Sowell Bends?
Well, you heard it again, the Solish, the hair Monaco Michelle, and you have some being. So, Helen,
Just to clarify, the Sowell Bends,
you just stuck on back, my son, with the.
that's about as close as I can get it. Yes, the Sowell Bends have been scored. They are part of the list. I mean, the list that's in the appendix is only the top 100 route sections that bubbled up to the top of the process. As you'll see in the weighted scores, there are significant sections of road with the same final weighted score, which is another reason why we want to revisit them with the better, the more detailed information we have from the Road AI survey, to really focus in on what the actual defects are and what's the best method of repairing those sections on individual roads, and then we'll basically turn the handle again and re-prioritize on that basis.
News.
Thank you for letting me back in here. Could I just ask, when the roads have been weighted for scoring, do you look and review accidents that have taken place on stretches of road over a period of time that could contribute to road condition?
Yes, we sit down monthly with Police Scotland. We go through all the accidents or road, well, they're called road traffic collisions. There's no such thing as an accident, I believe. So these, we study each of these reported collisions with the police on a monthly basis. We review them as to whether there was any issue with the road that impacted on them. And then as part of the scoring that we do here, we're looking at, as I said before, volume and the speed of the road that's concerned when we're looking at investment. We also have links with Transport Scotland as well on road safety and the various initiatives that we're looking to move on as well. So just a bit of an advanced notice for you. One of the things we're looking at this year is, as we're replacing some of the extra friction surfacing like you see outside at the approach to the roundabout there at the Nicholson, that direction. We're looking at doing some sections of roads and bends with that this year as pilots as well to see if that helps. So the answer to your question is yes.
Yeah, thanks for that. And just one final, can we do anything to get additional funding for our roads? And this is for across the whole of the Western Isles, because I don't know how, I just came through as part of Highland Road Council roads last week through Skye and through Bear Scotland. I put a massive amount of resurfacing work through that road and through that area. I know it was badly needed, but they seem to have received quite a considerable amount of capital programme for their road network. I just fail to see how we're not able to get more money from the government for our roads, you know, because it is something that is going to be a pressing matter. It's something that we're going to have to push hard for. We're going to have to do something about it. And I just don't know how we can't just keep saying we've got no money to do something. We need to put the pressure on somebody to find the finance to do it. And I don't know how to bring that forward. Or how you bring it forward as a department. It's not easy, Mr. Mackenzie. I appreciate that.
You'll probably find that most, sorry.
Well, ha drunk road when you're in ski and I make a you. But a Bear Scotland, you know, a chanel and piece and a corner gale to geen from at Gamakaman is bissen and road and ack. Well,
that's just what I was going to say.
Yeah.
If you go off the main trunk routes through the Highlands are managed by Transport Scotland and maintained by Transport Scotland. What we're finding is the local authority routes are suffering from lack of investment, lack of money. So if you go off the main route in Skye, I think as the chair was saying, you'll find that the roads on it much better than here. We don't have any trunk roads in the Western Isles. And indeed, if they were to be classed as trunk roads, then our financial settlement would be reduced on that basis. We can continue to approach government with the issues that we have with our roads investment worries. And I mean, I think I mentioned earlier as well when we're talking about our estate and the satisfactory condition of some of our estate. We're starting to see issues with that as well. We've been overspent on our R&M budget as far as properties go. So I think it's a big, the issue is bigger than roads, but I know that this report is specific on roads. And I think where we can look to get additional funding, we as officers will do what we can to do with government or other ways of pulling in funding. But it's quite a complicated horizon out there as far as funding goes. And, you know, there are a lot of pots of funding for various things, but they're generally specific. And you heard from Ronald earlier on that active travel funding is due to increase to the extent, I think, of 10% of the transport budget. So that's where government are looking to redivert a lot of their money. But the issue we have with that is that we then have less for our own main infrastructure. And sometimes our active travel opportunities are a lot less than you may find on mainland. So things are complicated, Councillor Morrison, but you know, as officers, we're doing our best to manage the infrastructure we have within the resources that we have and try to pull in funding with whatever opportunity that we can.
Agus hartelijk geschreven van een realtors van een cabinet secretary, Timichael Eishomer Hao. Agus na we minister in de code aan de nieuwst. Hier zijn konjo Timichael Roten agus schreven in na dus agus. Hij is een neste die wel veel willen zo bij misschien kent die zijn zo. Ach met tik zijn theorie agus niet zijn. En met daar lekker een Comhairle is dat je nest hoor ik zei waar I'm going to make a roll.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Carlman. Thank you for your report. Of course, we all want to fight our own corner, which is quite understandable. And thank you for all the times you've come up and filled a pothole in Benside over the last year. What I really question was to try and help me understand your scoring system on Appendix 1. I noted the condition there. If I'm reading the DBI properly, that 1 is bad and 5 is good. So, but all the condition of all the roads seem to be either 4 or 3.5. And I just wondered why that was, and how do you, what is the maths to get to the weighted score at the far end? Just to help me understand how it works.
I think I'll ask my colleague to come in.
Right, good. Yeah, so it's. Eilean?
Yes, when you mentioned the 1 is bad, 5 is good, that table 4 at section 6.4 in the report is actually it's an extract from the Vaisala Road AI information that we collected this year, which unfortunately has a differing scoring to the one we used for our previous visual inspection. So if you can ignore the 1 to 5 when you're looking at the appendix, then that would probably help. I should have made that a bit clearer in the report, possibly. So in Appendix 1, this is the same scoring mechanism we've used for previous capital programs. I think it was, say somewhere in the report what year it was approved. The worst condition on this list is a 4, and the best is a 1. So on that column there, on column 6, condition. So bad condition is 4, and it's the same for safety and traffic volume. It goes up to from 1 up to 4. The weightings, off the top of my head, I'm trying to remember. There's a slightly higher weighting for safety, slightly less for condition, and I think it's pretty much straight static for traffic volume. But I'll double check after and get back to you if that's okay, just to confirm that.
Again, you're something in Ash. The hick shit, can you metrics, Carl Mac, I shit it again.
So I'm too busy trying to. Thank you for that. That did confuse me. Yes, I understand. So I take it that all these conditions for roads are the worst in the island. But as one of my colleagues pointed out, I do not avoid potholes. I appreciate these are busier roads, but I certainly do not avoid potholes in a lot of these condition 4 roads. So I think I personally would appreciate another relook at it, like you said you were going to do. And I would probably argue there's, a lot of these 3.1, certainly the one in our wards, there is our inside one in particular is much worse than some of these. So yeah, I would certainly appreciate it. I'm not going to go into the arguments for doing inside. We've all got to do that, and we'll be here all day. But I'll leave it at that. So thank you very much.
Apple at the end of them. You guys.
Yes, I think what Colin was explaining as well is we've had a mechanism where we use scoring consistently over the past few years and investment programs, and we've generally used the quite long lengths of road to define the area. And if you look at the Barveston, the length there is 1 kilometre. So there are going to be sections that we're going to look at which would probably be much smaller than we have in the past. So that's the strategy that we're looking at. We're looking to get the worst condition, smaller areas, if that makes sense. In the past, you would look at, say, a 5 kilometre stretch of road and say, okay, we need to do that. And you would overlay at all, or certainly long sections. We're in the process now of going through, okay, in that section of road, which is the worst? So, and this is, again, what I was mentioning, it would be useful to have a MAUG on this, so we can go through that rationale. We can get that message to more members to help understand, because I agree with you, it can be difficult to understand where these things come from. I'll stop.
Right, John Orman.
Thank you, that's more clear.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Cala, and thanks, Colin, for explaining everything. It's not easy. I mean, I'm just thinking back to years back, and you've lost 60% of the budget. Well, I think quite a number of us were in here over the years, and we heard the tech services always saying we can't cut much more of our budget, but we still kept cutting it. So I'm afraid now it's just come back to bite us. And the roads are in a poor condition. They don't have the funds to fix all these roads. So it's as simple as that. Thank you.
Thank you, Haramit.
Thanks, Chair, for letting me in. I think if you're going to have a MAUG, you've got two willing representatives here who do an awful lot of road work, myself and Finlay, because it's our primary occupation is travelling the roads. Before we end up with any doom and gloom scenario, I'll fully support Councillor Macaulay, because when I was looking at the matrix here, I was hoping that 3.5 and 4 were on the wrong end of the scale, and that 5 was terrible and 1 was great. And then it kind of got confused where 1 was terrible and 4 was great. So I'm hoping it's 4 is rubbish. Yes, that's fine, because I will fully endorse Councillor Macaulay's plea for Benside, because it's probably the worst peat road on the island. But we've got roads that are busy and they need. Goat Hill is one of them. Stanwick Wood's going to deteriorate as well. We have this doom and gloom scenario. I don't think there are any 5 kilometre stretches that need to be done. There are smaller stretches that need to be done. But before we start knocking ourselves about the head with how bad our roads are, and Councillor MacLeod's right, the investment has gone right down. The general consensus is from people who visit these islands that our roads are in pretty good condition compared to the rest of the UK, where trunk roads, which are looked after by Bear Scotland, aren't catered for. So I'd like to thank the department for the work they're doing on the roads, because by and large, they're pretty good compared with the rest of the UK or the rest of Scotland, certainly. Considering you've lost 60% of the budget, we can all complain about different stretches of different bits and pieces, but given the lack of funding, people who visit here who have had to suffer through Skye or have had to suffer through other parts of the mainland off the main trunk roads, they can compliment us on the state of our roads. Of course, they could be better. You know, I mean, I don't know what's the figure that to get everything back up to the way it should be, you're talking £100 million probably to get everything back to where it was prior to 2008. You know, we had significant investment. Yes, we could do with bits of road that need work done on them, but by and large, I think we're pretty lucky. You know, we would love to see the investment that we had, but like I say, I'd like to think that given what you've got to play with, Cala, the roads are in a pretty decent condition by and large, and you need to target the specific areas where points have been raised by Councillor Crichton, Councillor MacLeod, Councillor Morrison as well. You know, if we target the areas rather than just have a blanket approach to historically, this is what we've set out in our plan to do in year 3, 4, 5, 6. Look at what people are bringing forward and say, yes, we can do this 100 yards or 200 yards. Target the specific area that need to work. I don't think there's any 1 kilometre stretch that needs done by and large, or 5 kilometres certainly. You know, if you're more forensic in the application of the upkeep of the roads, I think you can better use the budget. But again, I'd like to compliment the state of the roads, considering what everybody else is bringing back to us, who are listening to people who have come through other parts of Scotland. We're not too bad. You know, it would take people from off the island to tell you that. By and large, I think you're doing okay.
Well, fach belet son fach van Kaya, la shitach. So for the picking mischief and a half again, she goes per day van. Mustafa.
Thank you very much, Chair. And Following Norman's positive note, I don't want to go back to negative things, but I think
that's why I said it, Mustafa.
most of the points have been raised, especially clarification around the matrix and the scoring mechanism and the question around the road traffic thing. But it's when I was looking at just a clarification around the repairs that have been done through either the road mender or the jet pass or something. And I hope some of the repairs near us, the ones I'm talking about, are temporary, because some of them are already worse than or just as bad as before the repairs were done. So that's just clarification. The question as well, I was just going to ask, in terms of when where there are major contracts or major work done by contractors like housing settlement in Lochmadi or whatever, do we include any clauses in the contract with the contractors that at least the road is returned back to the same standard it was before the major sort of work has started? Because, you know, using heavy machinery and things on the road, some sections of the road are getting damaged. Looking also back at the report, obviously, finally 6.4, which, you know, as a result of the full DVI information collected and evaluation, when will we be able to carry on, you know, work that will prevent some of our roads becoming really unacceptable? Do you ever foresee a situation where we'll be able to do that? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mustafa. I mean, the question you asked about contractors or large projects having an impact on the roads is quite a difficult one to deal with. We do, in advance of construction traffic starting, do some pre-construction surveys. Large vehicles have a right to be on the road and to use the road network, so it would have to be quite extreme before we would actually be able to challenge a contractor and get them to come to do repair works for us. There's been quite a lot of instances, even on Scottish mainland, where there's been works done that councils have had no success at all in chasing contractors for mending roads after construction projects. We will, of course, if we can, pursue these, but again, we've got little success in doing so. Yes. Next question is again difficult to answer, because unless we see more money basically coming into the roads infrastructure, then we will continually be filling potholes which aren't permanent repairs. They will come out, but the likes of the road mender and the kind of the cutout patching that we were doing in the past as well prolonged the life of these sections that we were doing. We've come out of quite an average winter maybe, but during the winter, when you see rainfall, freezing conditions, and potholes emerging, then it's very difficult to do a permanent repair on them at the time. So just now we kind of use the good weather when we've got it to do better repairs if we can. And this is where the mender comes in, where the jet patcher is back on the road to be able to do these repairs. So can I see us being at a position where we've got everything the way we like it? Not in this current financial climate, I'm afraid.
Right, like me a dashu Mustafa, can kindig go the hashtag it.
It's okay, thanks very much. I was just saying, you know, I think, Tala, in terms of the contract, could that be a clause, you know, as part of the sweetener of giving the contract, that it's you know, like a road is assessed around the major work, and then an agreement is before the contract start? Thank you.
Again, that's very difficult because generally construction work is costing more. People are trying to cut less or do less and value engineer construction projects. So generally, if you're going to say to a contractor, we want you to replace that road after you finish your construction project, somebody's going to pay for it. So whether it's us or whether it's the developer, and then you can see developers coming back and saying, well, that's unreasonable of you to ask that condition. So if we were to be building as an example, the residential home in Goat Hill, if we'd said to the contractor, you need to replace the road surface between the manor roundabout and the site, we would have to pay for that because a contractor's not going to do something for nothing. There are planning clauses that can be used, but generally these large vehicles pay road tax, and they will say, well, we've got a right to use these roads unless there's abnormal loads or abnormal use. And what we would tend to do in a large project is agree a construction transportation plan with them, where they maybe limit the frequency of loads at certain times. So if you can spread the loads over longer periods of time, you're not getting so much shock loading on your road. And we also ask them to avoid areas like when they were doing the works at the Goat Island. They are getting them to avoid round about the Nicholson Institute there when the kids were going into school. So there's ways that we can actually come in and influence the construction transportation plans, but actually getting money to upgrade or do something to the road in advance or after the contract is very difficult to do.
Colin Gordon.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, everybody. And I'd like to thank Mr. Mackenzie and Mr. McKeever for everything they're doing. And I want to also acknowledge how difficult the job is in terms of the road maintenance, especially with the funding. And maybe it's time for us, maybe in the MOUG, to revisit some of these budget decisions we've made over the years, taking off 25% of road maintenance, and hopefully that will be up for discussion for the next budget setting. I also want to thank the team for their the quick responses to some of my requests and some of the potholes, especially in the cairns. I have to say the Community Association were really hugely appreciative of these potholes being filled. But I was actually going to bring up, I was happy to hear about the road mender. And that's really good, because I had seen that Midlothian Council had purchased I think it was a 13-ton pothole permanent repair machine, and it fixes potholes in 30 minutes, and its target is to repair 1,000 potholes permanently in the first 6 months. Now, it was quite costly as well, but I wondered, I didn't want to stay into operational matters, but can you just tell us the road mender, what will it do? And I'm grateful that that's been purchased, but what sort of thing does it do, and in terms of permanence? Or thanks.
A road member, go to River Street away now, Caroline.
It's probably a very much a smaller scale than what you've mentioned there in Lothian. And I mean, there are vehicles and bits of plant being designed for this kind of thing. They are costly. The road mender is a smaller scale of that. It helps with cutting out and the placing of hot material in shallower areas of pothole, basically. So when you've got cracks on roundabouts, on joints, things like that, then you're actually getting a much more permanent repair rather than trying to pour bitumen or get asphalt into these areas. I don't know. It's the kind of thing that we'll again give a lot more detail on if we have a MOUG, where we can look at the different types of plant available I know, I think Glasgow got something recently as well, but you're talking nearly £500,000 to £1 million for some of these bits of plant, which in that kind of environment they can afford, and it kind of makes it makes sense for them to have them. I sometimes wind up the team when I see the adverts for them and say, how many would you like? But I think the team, I mean, they appreciate the thanks that have been given by members today as well, because they have been appreciative of the problems that are out there. I think the team are very reactive to go on and try to keep things done to the best of their ability, and they do tend to have a good appreciation where the issues are and to do what they can appropriately. So I don't know if that helps with your question, Gordon, but I think it's something I would like to be exploring in the MOUGs as well, so we can say, okay, what kind of equipment's out there? What would make our life easier? Some of the plant we have is reaching end of life, so the likes of the velocity patcher we have, so that's demountable. We use it as a gritter during the winter months. We get it back on the road during the summer, and that forces bitumen and stone chip into pothole areas. Gives a bit of a more permanent repair, but it doesn't give us a nice smooth finish in larger areas. That's in need of renewal in the very near future. The surface dressing plant we have, some of the equipment there is nearing end of life, and that'll need significant investment. And again, that's why we want to engage with members on what the appropriate measures are going forward.
Right, Gordon, let me just say, or Skipper.
Thanks. Thanks a lot, Chair, and thanks a lot to Mr. Mackenzie for that. You really know how to wind up your team by promising them lots of machinery. But I think at the end of the day, if we can discuss this at the MOUG, and it's all about long-term financial planning as well, on how much it's costing the team to go out continually and fill these potholes temporarily, and look at a long-term solution. But no, thanks very much for that, Mackenzie. That's great, Mr. Mackenzie. That's great. Thanks.
Thank you, Chairman, for letting me back in just very briefly. Can we renew our calls to the Scottish Government for addressing the funding situation in terms of our capital programme, which has been reduced, as we know, over the last number of years? I think a fresh appeal, perhaps a leader could make representations along with yourself, Chairman, to the new Transport Minister.
Yes, we would.
And bring it to her attention the unique situation we have up here in terms of how important our roads infrastructure is to our connectivity, and maintaining and retaining that structure is crucial to our economic activity and growth. So perhaps yourself and the leader could jointly approach the Scottish ministers regarding this issue.
We met toilet sin igen och gav var sin första nyckelår och med en så gammalt var sin årsyn kine var en minister och garden is ich kan becken herken in där så sin kan en eeuwig worden dat is geen cent fee. Zeker wel kistik tennis be heel van Derek Gilloring member officer working group chudit dosh and nacharach being my own cusper and show.
Well, Chair, it really depends what the remit of the working group is going to be and what is going to be looked at. Establishing it would be on the back of a further report. I think the council has already agreed scoring criteria which officers use professional judgment to rank the various roads on. So it's the work that the member officer working group going to be to look at options for more efficient use of the funding that is available. I think there was talk there of different types of equipment, but that can always be done on the back of a report back to committee rather than established working group. I think we need, if you are looking at a working group, we would need a defined remit for the working group.
Well, I'm looking at a boiler geary, Derek. I'm looking at a boiler geary, Derek. I mean, can you finish the toilet? It's a big show again. Or you, I'm looking at bwyl son y ian, agus mae swrwng yn sien y ian os ymlaich ar ag. Fydd son miniach ag calum ar y hygw te mae i is bwyl.
I'm happy to come up with a remit for it. I mean, I did find the winter maintenance MOG very useful and be able to having that kind of detailed conversation with a group of members who could then better understand the complexities that we're dealing with winter maintenance. I was seeing the same thing for roads maintenance, where there's been a bit of discussion over things today. I agree the scoring mechanism needs to be consistent and across the Western Isles. The difficulty we have going forward is that, you know, there are going to be other issues that will be affecting roads maintenance. I mean, we've got the cost of tar, the unit cost of tar has been rocketing. So basically, what we can do with the money is less. The issue with the local tar plant, how we can work with the local industry, how we work with other contractors. So there's a number of things which it may be useful for members to have more detail on than I can give during a committee or through a report. Or I'm happy to come up with a remit for that.
I would suggest that myself and Mr. Mackenzie discuss a draft remit, and we can put a report up to the next meeting on potential remit for a MOG.
We ma comedy and go dult in you.
So I wasn't seeing the MOG happening imminently. The MOG would be, we're looking at future future programs. So I mean, I'd be happy enough for a MOG towards the end of this year.
Yeah. Bwyl tal little shit. Yeah. Beba. Rit big the gore kisten and so but bwyl a gun the hood in a molly in a 3 point a hound. Eisen. Beba. Gwash in nest go scuttle. An áskis an fisracha as a dorskúnda says, Liatacha e sévis tukal scuttle a hoof stew, son ahorstacha, agus an dillavis tukal steeg de is 3 shechkinen, agus bini een keimelish an ásk, agus flikti e kisten sabi, segian. Ian, Hashin Kateo.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the report was an update on the long-awaited introduction of the curbside recycling service to areas of Lewis and Harris which didn't have that, and along with the introduction of these curbside collection services, the changeover to 3 weekly collections for Lewis and Harris. We were successful in getting funding in, which enabled us to be able to buy the bins to be able to allow the rollout to happen. And also produce a leaflet that would go around to the householders. And that was all done through Recycling Improvement Fund money from the Scottish Government. That was on the back of the Comhairle having signed up to the Recycling Charter Code of Practice, which recommended that the provision of residual waste capacity each household be limited to 8 litres per week. The rollout happened, and the implementation of the service was after the writing of this report. So following that, there have been a number of questions coming in from the public, and the customer service team, the cleansing officers, and also the zero waste team have been answering questions as beginning from the public. The collections have been designed in such a way so we've been able to utilise we've had no extra budget, no extra staff, so it's utilising our current fleet, our current members of staff, and the way we could implement this additional collection service to those in Lewis and Harris who didn't have the blue and green bins was to redesign the whole collection service. The unfortunate thing is we're not blessed with a great flexibility because we have to continue picking up waste, so the old service ceased and the new service began. So there have been a number of questions that have come up since then from members of the public and members also, and we've being able to put the leaflet onto the council website, collection dates on the council website, and also if people are looking for additional capacity, because that's one of the things that has come up quite a bit when there is a criteria that we have for people to apply for additional residual waste capacity. That is also on the council's website. Any questions?
Well, Kish, take things to be again. And you? Eva? Oh, maybe could you give me?
Thank you. I'll be very brief. And thank you, Ian, for the report on that. Yeah, there's a couple of, with it going into a 3 weekly collection and that, I have had 2 or 3 sort of people in villages, you know, close to the shores and all that, the local bins, not the household bins, but the local bins to your Machar entrances and shore entrances, etc. They seem to be overflowing. In fact, I was just sent a photo today from Portonese, which seemed to be totally overflowing. And just wondering, is it possible to get extra capacity up there, yeah, for things like that?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, that's one thing we'll be looking at, is the additional pressure on these areas, which would have previously had a fortnightly uplift, which now go to 3 weekly. And we'll look at these on a case basis. I would encourage members that they are receiving representation from anybody to get in touch with me, and we can look at these, particularly with the busy season coming ahead. At the same time, we'll always be limiting how many bins we put out there, because we don't want these to be used for overflow disposal.
Oh,
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Ian, for the report, and to the customer service staff too for having to respond to various inquiries. The feedback I've had really is regarding, again, capacity issues in terms of the new 3 weekly collection or the lack of capacity. And I'm encouraged to hear Ian saying that we can approach him about those issues. But was that taken into consideration in the redesign of the service in terms of, you know, capacity issues that households might have in terms of the number of bins that are going to actually need?
Yeah.
Yes, it was. The bins that we were using, we're currently using a 240 litre capacity and size. So to be compliant with the charter, the option would either be to have a smaller bin and continue with a fortnightly collection, or to continue with the bin size we currently had and have it over 3 weekly. And to allow us to be able to roll out the curbside collection service to areas of Lewis and Hards that didn't have the blue and green bins, our only option was to utilise the 240 litre bins we had and roll out a 3 weekly service. As I said, you know, there is an eligibility criteria for people to read to see if they're eligible for additional waste capacity, and that now can be done online on the council's website.
We're Kish, take things to be early, and you. We're boiling going to go on our scores from you. Eva. Gosh, in Cusper, no, Hundi, I was going on the day where I did in Cunyo, I was the Shen close in Cusper 3 days, Ashkin House, the Heen. I was a share or son, Fistrach. Eva. It's in the next on the day where it's on Perkach, Cusper, no, Hundi, I was going on the day where